Page 60, Part 5. It is completely wrong to assume that physical illnesses could be solely caused by wrong thoughts, or could be avoided or healed through a positive thinking alone. Nor is a purely positive thinking always the only fitting remedy for psychical disturbance, because, in fact, often psychoanalytical help from qualified practitioners is just as necessary as are psychotropic drugs. However, positive thinking, that is to say, neutral, positive, equalized thinking, is necessary in any case, but in certain cases only as a form of additional aid, which, however, must not be underestimated in its effect. The particular state of the psyche is caused by corresponding thoughts, which are preceded, as a rule, by certain events, experiences, impressions, and occurrences, and so forth, which then, by means of the thoughts, evoke in the psyche corresponding feelings, from which thoughts, which have the same direction as these feelings, are in turn created in the consciousness. Therefore, in any case, the might of the thoughts is decisive in causing certain physical impulsations and states which can be joyous, happy, and liberating, as well as depressing, unhappy, and oppressive. If negative results and states thereby come about, then these must naturally be counteracted, which can happen solely by means of measures which oppose the terrible things, thus through a neutral, positive, equalized thinking, which is simply called positive thinking for short. But how does this come about? The method for that is as follows. First, the origin of the terrible things from which the wrong and negative thoughts have arisen must be searched for. With that, one must take care not to rummage around in the past, because this can lead to further complications. Thus, solely the reason for the wrong thinking must be searched for, which is then precisely analyzed in order to clarify the circumstances as precisely as possible. A neutral, positive, equalized line of thought must then be formed out of this creation of clarity and be tended and nurtured in order to form, in this way, a new, progressive, and healing form of thinking which counters the harmful negative aspects. An extraordinary amount of nonsense is told and written directly in regard to positive thinking, and in fact, quite especially in esoteric form, such as the writing-obsessed esotericist Joseph Murphy (who killed himself), the superlative minister Norman Vincent Peale, as well as Dale Carnegie, and Erhard F. Freytag, who is described as a religious zealot and charlatan. But aside from these, there are many others of the same kind for whom it is only about their esoteric, religious, or other doctrine, or purely about profit, which they snatch, or rather snatched, with their books and lectures and so forth. But in addition to that, represented in the book business are also renowned psychotherapists, with their works, which completely condemn positive thinking and advocate the erroneous opinion that solely psychoanalysis and psychotherapy are, by their grace, beneficial and justifiable. For example, the psychotherapist Gunther Scheich advocates this wrong view. Naturally, there are many charlatans and frauds and so forth among the authors and so-called psychoanalysts and psychotherapists who consider themselves magnificent, but that does not mean that positive thinking is therefore simply nonsense. It is certainly not, neither in regard to the psyche, nor in regard to the actual might of the thoughts. A positive thinking is always healthy and evolutive, even when it is not directly related to purely physical health, rather on the whole to the consciousness itself as well as to the psyche, so therefore to the world of thoughts and world of feelings. Therefore a fluid transition exists between the thoughts and the feelings, as does the fact that the might of the thoughts is able to influence and even steer the feelings as well as the psyche. Accordingly, it is therefore true that, as a result of the might of the thoughts, pathological disorders requiring treatment can emerge in the psyche, and thereby in the world of feelings, when the thoughts are of such a negative kind that they can bring an influence to bear in this form. It must then simply be clarified whether it thereby then concerns a proper psychical illness or simply a momentary mood fluctuation. And if the human being is not in the position to do that himself or herself, then there are trained psychotherapists everywhere who can be consulted and who are able to analyze, assess, and apply therapy to the case, should that be required. However, first and foremost, the human being should always be master of his or her situation, and consequently, personally concern himself or herself with his or her own matters, problems, and facts, but he or she should thereby not hesitate to search for outside help when this is required, and take advantage of it. But that does not mean that a psychiatrist or psychotherapist should be consulted on account of every trivial matter, because often they only cause even more harm, which certainly does not mean, however, that that is always so, or is so in the majority of the cases. The human being is very often affected, in particular, by so-called, quote, normal mood fluctuations. And ultimately, there would be barely one human being who does not at least sporadically fall prey to such. Although the planet Earth is a true paradise, the human being certainly does not live on a celestial body of pure bliss, on which there would be no problem areas or areas of conflict which he or she would have to overcome consciously-mentally and psychically. And precisely because it affects virtually every single Earth inhabitant who has a human nature, every individual is thus somehow thankful that the creational laws and recommendations offer him or her an opportunity to improve his or her life, psyche, consciousness, character, morality, life circumstances, and mental world, indeed through the might of right, positive, and equalized thinking. But that does not mean that all the problems pertaining to health and one's life circumstances and so forth could be thereby solved, because this is actually not the case, but the possibility can certainly be made real, where one's own thinking forms the corresponding inner or outer circumstances, which can also be changed again through one's own thinking and its might. If burdens are related to the psyche, to a serious psychical illness, which can clearly be diagnosed as such, and through which the development of one's life is seriously restricted in a lasting form, then not only must one raise the necessary understanding for that, and recognize the fact that external help from experts is required, but one's thinking must also be directed along the right paths, and a neutral, positive, equalized thinking must be made real and maintained. Even with psychotherapy, and by taking psychotropic drugs, no human being can avoid also maintaining neutral, positive, equalized, that is to say, positive thoughts, which are just as effective and necessary with a psychical healing process as they are with one which is purely related to the body. In practice, the Earth human being is still not so far along that he or she could, in any case, withstand the laws of the influences and conflicts of this world and not fall into serious crises about them. Crises through which symptoms requiring treatment can possibly be developed. But such symptoms are different for each human being, because no consciousness and no psyche, no character and no morality has the same degree of development of any other. Therefore, everything is different, and indeed due to the actuality of the evolution into which every human being is differently integrated, precisely according to his or her own consciousness-based progress. But from that it also follows that the state of the psyche is also different and variable from human being to human being, and in no wise always remains as it is. That means that also a psychical illness does not have to last forever, rather that it can be cured at any time if the necessary right steps for that are undertaken. Thus, every single human being can get into psychical difficulties during his or her life, but nevertheless free himself or herself from them again. The sole decisive factor thereby is that the psychical disturbance is recognized and this fact is accepted, and one admits that the psyche needs help. This is decisive for the further course of life. First and foremost, the help with this should come from the thoughts from one's own consciousness, and indeed in the form of an analysis of the origin of the preceding wrong thoughts through which the psyche was disturbed, via wrongly created feelings. After that, a positive thinking which is set in opposition to the illness, must be formed and used in order to positively change the feelings and to normalize them again. If one does not succeed in doing that oneself, then an expert must be consulted who is trained in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, and who can provide the necessary help. Unfortunately, it is the case that many human beings believe that they can look right through and understand the very complicated form of their own psyche, or that of another person, and they are of the opinion that they could provide therapy for this with dubious self-help books and so forth, when a psychical illness emerges. But this is a quite monstrous fallacy, to which even certain psychoanalysts, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists fall victim, who carry their titles only as a result of arrogance, greed for profit, or as a result of wrong, self-produced, or adopted theorems.